Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for your patience. We greatly appreciate your indulgence. Keep this in mind. It is the year 2020. If anything can go sideways or a little bit fluky, it will. And I think some of you may have logged on and found yourself in a discussion for Chief Information Officer. And although I'm sure that's well and good for a lot of folks, for someone like me who thinks high tech is an abacus and a rotary dial phone, this is the place to be over here in administration and finance. Well, good afternoon. My name is Fred Kittinger. I have the pleasure each day as serving as a Senior Associate Vice President of Government and Community Relations here at UCF. But today, I have the distinct honor of serving as your facilitator for this afternoon's session with one of the finalists for the Senior Vice President for Administration and Finance. The newly created Senior Vice President for Administration and Finance will serve as a key member of the university's senior leadership team to shape the financial and operational strategies that will support the academic mission of UCF. The position will provide vision, leadership, and stewardship of critical resources and the administrative infrastructure that is needed to support UCF's pursuit of excellence. Today's finalist is Gerald Hector, who currently serves as Executive Vice President and Chief Business Officer for Morehouse College. Here's our sequence of events this afternoon. The session will begin in just a moment with a presentation from Gerald, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions from the campus community. We are using Zoom webinar this afternoon to facilitate the conversation. To ask a question, you simply use the Q&A feature, which allows others to vote if they would like a similar question asked. And then I will help facilitate the Q&A with Gerald later on this afternoon. Now, to set the stage, the candidates receive the following presentation prompt to prepare them for this portion of their interview. As you look at the landscape of higher education and observe trends affecting public universities, what do you see as the most significant trends, challenges, and opportunities in the area of administration and finance? Discuss with us how this influenced three of the most important changes you have made at your current institution that best position the institution to become more efficient and more effective over the next decade and strategically create new revenue streams or perhaps redirect existing resources to advance the institution's academic mission. So now it is my pleasure to introduce to you Gerald Hector to begin this afternoon's presentation. Gerald, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Fred. Greatly appreciate it. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And it is my pleasure to be with you this afternoon. And I will get through this presentation hopefully in 20 minutes. I have a minute per slide. And it is my humble, I guess I would say, privilege yet again to be here with you. So we'll just jump right in, considering we might have a little bit of truncated time. Next slide, please. As I look over the landscape today and getting ready for this presentation and being with you guys today, I had the distinct pleasure of participating in a panel discussion late last week with a group of institutions from all across the country. And this particular slide and quote kind of resonated with me because not only is it for UCF proper, but public institution, private institution, and in between, we all are faced with the same problem. I would not read this to you, so hopefully you guys will absorb some of what is there. But the thing that gets me the most from this quote, from this particular paper, is discerning what is next. And I think for any institution of higher education today, that's what we are going to have to do as a collective, not only as a collective, but doing so in a manner that we bring transparency, collaboration, and camaraderie to everything that we do. Next slide, please. So typically, in any organization, you ask the question, who wants to change? And everyone then says, me. But then, who wants to change? The response is not as robust. This cartoon is one that I typically, in any change management situation, just as a moment of levity to say to folks, we want the change, and the change oftentimes is not to change what I am doing. However, in higher education today, we have to have the intestinal fortitude to say, not only do we want change, but that change and need to want the change will ask us to look at how we behave, our personal proclivities around how we view the institution, and more importantly, how we're going to move to the next level. Next slide, please. So what are some of the trends that I see? Each of these blocks, if you will, pretty much discerns for me public education today. Many of them could apply to a private institution, but public institution is one that's in our crosshairs today for discussion. So right out the gate, we all know that UCF is a state-supported institution here in the state of Florida. And with the COVID-19 virus, we've always heard the expression, even before COVID, that state universities are state located versus state supported. But that is going to be a situation that every state institution is going to have to address, public institution, because budgets have taken a hit. So that's the first thing that I see as a trend. The second thing that I see as a trend is that fundraising has to become part of the equation. We have to find ways to diversify revenues as much as possible, because the typical higher education model where 18 to 24-year-olds attend the institution, and then from that, the revenues and cash flow garnered from their attendance, maybe with auxiliaries and some other items, that model pretty much is challenged at this point in time, because the demographics of our nation are changing, both politically, socioeconomically, and basically based on race, creed, color, whatever you want to call it. Another area that is interesting to me is that space utilization. Many institutions went out and they bought amenities and built amenities, some of them with debt, in order to attract students. And now the bill has come due in an environment where cash flow is dwindling and net tuition revenue is flat to declining in some sectors of the country. So we still have to figure out, what do we do with our buildings and how do we maintain our buildings adequately? The other one that I stress a lot is deferred maintenance. Not only do we have to manage our buildings, but we have to maintain them. And more often than not, in a state environment, when budgets are challenged every year, pressures on the state budget comes to bear, what will happen is we continue with the major item that is in our budget, which is personnel. So if we still have to balance the budget, the thing that gets put on the plate or the chopping block more often than not is what we do with our deferred maintenance. The upper right is net tuition revenue. I mentioned that before. On a national basis, depending on private or public institution, net tuition revenue is only growing at about 1.5% per year. Some might get as high as 2%, but inflation might get anywhere from 1.8 to 1.9%. So if you're below that in your net tuition growth, you're not keeping pace with one of your largest revenue sources for the institution. The next trend that I see in a research environment is the competition for faculty, research faculty, and their ability to come to an institution, be productive, do great things, but also to be retained. So there is always a constant kind of competition in the marketplace for research faculty. That will continue into the future. Next slide, please. One of the areas that is growing, and UCF is no different, recently being designated a Hispanic serving institution, is diversity. For me, race, diversity, and inclusion are now not only a moral issue, but it's an economic issue. It's an economic issue from the basic standpoint that you have the student body is changing, because by the year 2027, it is posited that minority students will become the majority students on our college campuses. The data also suggests that they are the ones that will probably lack the ability to pay. So if you have that dynamic where your student body is changing, but your faculty and administrative staff is not changing at the same clip, you have tensions that will definitely come to bear. And we all saw what happened in the fall of 2015, having lived it myself, being the only vice president of color, trying to assist an institution to get through those tough times. I have a new appreciation for what that means. So diversity is going to be something that we have to look at, not only as something from a societal standpoint, but on a college campus, how we look at it in terms of economics. And then the last thing that I would say as part of the trends is the value proposition for higher education in general. When you look at COVID impact right now shows that up more than ever, where people are questioning yet again, what's the value of a higher education degree when students can go out and do things professionally and they can move along and build lives for themselves in that regard. Next slide, please. So to go a little deeper, to move quickly, I won't read all of these slides. I normally have pictures, but just so that I don't take the liberty of thinking that everyone understands the issues, it's just to share a little bit. So in state government and in state supported institutions, you hear this expression, the lost decade. The lost decade is from the Great Recession of 2008, 2009 through to today. And what you're seeing is the vagaries of budgets that happens, the highs and lows and the sawtooth nature of it. The state of Florida, however, has had kind of a steadiness to it, but regardless of how things turn out, COVID has brought to us a challenge, and that is the state of Florida has seen state taxes probably is about $26 billion of the budget. And now we're in the COVID environment where the same state taxes that we get through tourism and things like that, that's challenged. On a prospective basis, one can think that that will continue. Sales tax, as I mentioned, is one of the largest sources of the revenue, and we have to look at it in that context. Next slide. I mentioned fundraising before. Fundraising is going to become a key component to any strategy for long-term sustainability. And in my prior life, one of the places that I've been, we focused heavily on getting no revenue source to be above 25% of total revenues on an annualized basis. That gives us a diversification of revenue, and fundraising plays a very important part in it. Now, many of us who have been in higher education or fundraising organizations have known since about 2004 that you will not be able to grow unrestricted resources from a fundraising perspective in double digits, but you can do so in a restricted way. So the issue then becomes, how do you get restricted money that feels unrestricted? That's a strategy that we would have to employ to get that done. So universities, like all of the nonprofits in the nation, are going to have to figure out how do they cultivate and retain what I call molasses donors. Donors who give slow and steady, and that you can have budget predictability on an annualized basis. Annual alumni giving is also going to be key. I think UCF has approximately 260,000 alumni. How do you engage them in order for them to move things forward and see the institution with this need to diversify its revenues? Next slide, please. Space utilization, I mentioned. You would definitely see more often than not. I've done at least 2 or 3 space utilization studies when I've gone to institutions, and I'm always surprised by the utilization percentage. When you see it gets down to 60% or so, you got to ask the fundamental question, are we utilizing the current space that we have efficiently? And are we getting the maximum ROI out of the facilities that we currently have before we start building others? And one of the things that comes into play is scheduling functions, and the capacities of spaces is not generally understood across the board. So obviously a registrar, for example, will be the one scheduling rooms and so on in academic buildings, but you have many more buildings other than academic buildings that are part of the enterprise and that are part of what drives and generates the revenues for the institutions. If we have excess capacity, we should be looking at ways now to address excess capacity and monetizing that capacity. And if we have land that's basically underdeveloped or underutilized, how do you get that to be a revenue driver at the institution? As I mentioned before, the amenities race to attract students have now left folks with buildings that they have to maintain. They built the buildings, but didn't have like an endowment reserve to service those buildings. So we have those type of challenges. And deferred maintenance in and of itself is oftentimes conflated between routine maintenance, preventative maintenance, and deferred maintenance. And oftentimes we have them being conflated and nothing gets done. Next slide, please. State of Florida, I mentioned before, it will probably look to raise its tuition if you're to believe media reports. But even if you raise the tuition since the first time since 2013, there still is a question that must be asked, whether or not we're going to increase institutional waivers in order for students to afford that, because post-COVID, families are hurting. Two income families have sometimes now turned into single income families. So even if you raise the tuition rate, can your customer afford the product that you are putting forward? Also, the state of Florida is interesting in that it has the second lowest rate of tuition in the nation. What does that look like? And what is the mix in enrollment and enrollment management that you have to overcome in order to generate positive cash flow that can sustain the institution? Tuition discounting. Not many institutions believe in 5-year rolling modeling of tuition discounting to ensure that there's budget predictability, one, and also that we have the capacity to do what we say we want to do. As I've said to many people over my time, the term nonprofit is a tax designation. It is not a business model, and we have to look at it in that light. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, hiring, we have to hire and retain talented faculty. We have to hire and retain talented administrators as well. And more importantly, how do you hire those folks when everyone is after the same folks? So in terms of a research institution, the context of a research institution, everyone wants the best faculty. And the faculty in and of themselves know that. And you can grow someone up in your organization. And then another institution that's wealthy can come and basically get individuals to join. And as I mentioned before, first-class research faculty, facilities for that faculty where they can provide research and instruction. Next slide, please. The last one that I would touch on in some detail is diversity and inclusion. As I mentioned before, by the year 2027, we will see that happening where minority students will be the majority students. You will see it across the nation. It's not going to be localized, I don't think, to one area. So we all have to wrestle with this. So now you have to look at it in the context that this is no longer just a moral issue, but an economic one. One institution I was a part of grew its diversity from about 5% to 25% in 7 years. And growing the faculty and staff and the diversity there, it barely moved a percentage or two. That is something that we have to tackle and tackle it wholeheartedly. Next slide, please. So for me, in looking at this role and looking at all the challenges that are there, it's going to be tough. The elevator to success is out of order. You will have to use the stairs. And quite honestly, that quote is what many institutions are wrestling with today, especially as we see COVID still spiking and the impact that it's having on finances of institutions, the impact it's having on making decisions, and especially in the environment of UCF where you're getting ready to do a new ERP system, a new budget model, and implementing a new budget system. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, I'll just go over again, just real quickly, opportunities that are there. We must diversify revenues. For-profit, research, non-research, liberal arts, whatever you are in terms of an higher education institution, you are going to have to diversify your revenues. To achieve that goal is not just on getting to more topside revenue, we're also going to have to take a look at our current cost structure to ask ourselves fundamentally. The University of Central Florida grew at a very rapid pace. But as I look at the fundamentals that undergirds the foundation, it's not as solid as it should be. So our practices, our policies, and just doing some longitudinal looks, if you will, of how we got here, and then how we have to reallocate resources for the future, in addition to growing revenues. As I mentioned, fundraising and research growth are going to be key, and our decisions have to be data-driven. Cannot be driven by anecdotes or what has happened in the past or norms. We have to get to a place where data drives the decision and do so in a very, very transparent way with the entire campus and inviting stakeholders in and to address all the things that we have to get done. The last bullet point there, you're already doing it. You got to upgrade the systems. The good thing for UCF right now is that you're doing it all at the same time. So this system implementation is not just a new accounting system. This system that is being contemplated will require us all, or you all at this point, to go through a process of business process reevaluation. Next slide, please. The 3 Ps are important to me, and I think that this is how you get these things done. The 3 Ps are people, process, and performance. You have to invest in people. As I mentioned many times before, research faculty, but you also have to invest in people by way of compensation programs. You have to invest in them by way of professional development to make sure people have the skill sets they need in order for them to be successful in their roles. We have to redefine and enhance our processes. That means everything gets placed on the table and gets up for a review in a dispassionate way, open and transparent, in a way that folks can challenge what the assumptions are. And then we have to be able to monitor and assess our performance. A lot of times in the South, we just get ready for SACS reaccreditation every 10 years. But we need to get to a point where assessment becomes woven into the fabric of what we do on an annualized basis. It's not just the only thing to do it 10 years, but analyze what we're doing so we can make decisions, especially at a state institution where you're subject to cuts and changes in state support. Another opportunity we talked about is the decentralized nature of the RCM incentive budget model that you're looking at. And then to bring to bear on that, this mnemonic device, OATE, O-A-T-E, ownership, accountability, transparency, and empowerment. I believe in that. If individuals have roles and titles, they are to own the roles and titles, but at the same time, they have to be accountable for what they're supposed to deliver. And in delivering, we have to be transparent and be transparent up to confidentiality bounds. But when people don't know stuff, they make it up. And in a college or university setting, that is where a lot of the tension comes from. And then the last piece is empower. Empowering people so that they can feel a sense of value and worth, that it's okay for me to bring my ideas forward and someone will listen and someone will take my concerns or my ideas seriously. I'm a big proponent in scenario planning. That goes all the way down to our real assets, obviously our buildings, our capital, and anything else in between. Capacity, we got to look at our master plan, tying our deferred maintenance to our master plan and space utilization. A lot of times people overlook the fact that the way we utilize our existing assets is probably the best way for us to drive revenue into the future. But oftentimes we look to the state, we look to other vehicles to get revenue when sometimes we can manage our way to success. And we have to foster stronger relationship with state and federal agencies so they see the value proposition of a UCF. They see us as a research institution that is on the cutting edge of doing things that will benefit humanity as a whole, and they want to invest in that. Next slide, please. From a social side of things and just a human side of things, we got to build trust, and we build trust through collaboration and focused debate. I've never seen an issue that will never have two sides to it, but at some point you're going to have to get to the middle to solve problems and to move the institution forward, understanding that not everyone is going to win, but the institution is the main priority. Silos, they got to be identified and construct engagement in what I call the sandbox. How do we get everybody in the sandbox so we all play nice? That's always a challenge when you're tackling culture. Accurate, timely, and consistent data to assist with decision-making. That is just paramount. Excel spreadsheets and access databases and things like that are good, but they don't get us to where we need to be. And we have to have the courage to place all cost centers of the university on the table for a discussion. When you look at the rapid growth of UCF, I can only imagine, I don't know this for a fact, but you would probably have a tremendous amount of cost centers that if you were to take a dispassionate look at them, you would realize that there might be resources put into those cost centers annually that are not of the best use for the institution. So how do you get at that? How do you go into those conversations? You do so with collaboration and building trust that we're going to do the right thing by not only the individuals who oversee those cost centers, but also the institution as a whole. Next slide, please. I'm a big proponent in empowering people, and I'll say to people all the time, a mistake is not a mistake unless you learn from it. I see it sometimes as mistakes because no person I know is infallible. We all make mistakes. But if we make mistakes or fail at something, it's always good to fail forward so that you're learning from the mistake that you made and you're growing from it. And I believe wholeheartedly in that. And as part of being an advocate for not only my team members, but an advocate for the institution, that is something that I live by. Next slide, please. So examples of transformations that I have done. I was asked to provide 3. So I spread it out over several because I've been at many institutions. Like currently where I am at Morehouse, I am trying to diversify revenues across the board 25%. It's tough because we're a tuition dependent institution, but we have 2 things in our favor, our brand and our land. So now we're also taking advantage of what are called opportunity zones that were set up by the federal government. So now you have investors that are chasing us. How do you turn that into a value proposition that's going to drive revenues to the institution in the foreseeable future? Well, you get with a partner where that's going to invest in you, and you out of that investment, you get either buildings or you get an auxiliary that's driven solely standing alone by way of a public partnership. You get new buildings, you get new spaces, aesthetically pleasing, but you also now are going to get a passive source of income for years to come. Continuing education is a big thing for us because now we're pushing to see whether or not we can monetize that from the standpoint of being in Atlanta and how we are going to have people to want a Morehouse education. Morehouse is a premier institution, and we should be pushing our brand further out into the market. And one is just basically rental of facilities. If you have excess capacity or a dormant campus during the afternoon hours or weekend, why not try to make money off of it? The second thing that I'm doing is I'm changing the entire enrollment management process, working with a couple of VPs and also the Director of Financial Aid and Admissions. And what we're looking at there is a digital approach versus a traditional model for how we admit students to the college. So COVID right now has hit everyone hard. And what we have to do now is pivot and say, how are we marketing the institution? So we're telling our story in such a way that we're using technology, Google Analytics, our website, and capturing things through our website. How are we addressing touch points with students so we reach a broader we reach a broader cross-section of the nation who probably have never heard of a Morehouse. So instead of going to a student fair or going to different campuses, students now are more inclined to do things via their smartphone device. How do you make that happen? Data management, I'm a big fan of data management around 5-year net tuition modeling. That's something that I've done at another institution, and it brings budget predictability and no surprises. But if we can get to a place where we are not simply throwing money in aid to students in terms of waivers in the public space, but we truly understand what do students need in order to get them to enroll. So what that does is instead of giving a student $25,000 as an example, that student might just need $5,000, but you're not giving away institutional aid of $20,000 per student. That's real cash that comes back into the institution, helps with the liquidity, helps with our cash flow. And then reallocation of resources through new budget methodologies. Since getting here, I've had to create a budget committee, empower that budget committee. I've placed students on the committee and faculty on the committee. It's the first time in the college's history that they have had this committee. And I'm currently in the process of streamlining operations. So we're dealing with the cost side of things rather than simply saying that we're going to get to a new reality by getting new money. That takes time. So those are some of the things I'm working on. Next slide, please. Expense reduction, I don't want to sound repetitive, but we are looking at a budget model. I've done that at 2 institutions already, putting in place service centers where it's possible. Just completed an academic costing study here. All of these things are geared towards getting information out to the campus for the campus to see and not be saying that the folks in the administration building are doing something and Mr. Hector has a safe behind his chair where all the money is housed. What we're doing is we're putting it out to the campus, enlivening the discussion with the campus, and basically having assumptions stress tested, and also trying to figure out what's next for the institution. Qualitative measures, as I mentioned before, I've created working groups across to study, report, and operationalize anything we come up with. Something that I started at Ithaca College, and they're still doing it today, is asking the president to start a monthly series where the CFO goes out and speaks to the campus, tell them what's going on with the finances of the institution, and we work through it in that regard. And from my interactions in the fall of 2015 at Ithaca College is leading efforts around campus climate. Campus climate is going to be something that whoever is in this role is going to have to assist the president and whoever else is part of that group, the cabinet elsewhere, in leading this effort versus have it just basically evolve. Next slide, please. So at the end of the day, on the left is where some institutions find themselves today. They have a lot of things. They're making it happen. They're going. The institution is growing. It's moving. Everything seems to be flowing well until a crisis hits, like a COVID or like 2008, 2009, the downturn. And then they realize that they're really operating, looking like on the left. Where we're trying to go is where we are to the right. And actually, these two photos are from an institution I have been at when I took over information technology and started to tour data closets. So I asked them before the contractor came in working with us, before they shut it all down, I asked to take the picture on the left and the picture on the right. This is symbolic and a metaphor for me in terms of the power of transformation and change. And I believe that's my last slide, Fred, and I'll be more than happy to take any questions.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Gerald. Very, very thorough presentation and excellent job of capturing the past practices, emerging trends, and some of the challenges that the higher education is facing in the future. I also enjoyed your metaphors of the stairs versus the elevator. Very, very appropriate here in higher education these days. We have several questions I've already queued up with our audience members. I want to remind all of our participants here today to go into the Q&A function to list your questions. Our first one, Gerald, is I think comes from somebody who went to Publix today for the buy one, get two free, because it's actually 3 questions in one, but it's a very important topic because one of our top priorities is always the safety of our students and our staff here at UCF. Here's the question. Please describe your experiences in managing a policing or public safety organization. Also, please address what you see as your role with regard to overseeing and supporting the UCF Police Department. Lastly, what is your view of public safety as a whole and within a college environment, particularly if you should see a difference?
Thank you. Thank you for the questions. So my experiences is primarily Johnson C. Smith. I oversaw campus police, sworn police officers, and a mix with police, sworn police, and security. So over that period of time, learned a lot about it. I have my own personal opinions and things like that, but had to bring it right back to what is it that we are trying to do. Safety of the campus is first. I am a big proponent of my direct reports immersing themselves into the campus. You have to be in the campus, you have to know the campus, you have to know the people. I'm a big proponent of getting out of the cars. When I was at Johnson C. Smith, I basically limited the movements in cars, and we got segways. And we had people to move around the inner part of the campus. So you can get a better sense and a better feel for the people that you are working with. That's the way that I like to describe it. In terms of how I view campus safety, I think at the end of the day, we have to be in a mode that parents are sending their children here, or students, young adults are coming here. They're under our purview. They are to be protected. They are to be looked after. But at the same time, we also have to have some measures around how we are going to govern our interactions. So that's very, very important to me. I do spend time with a lot of students in that regard. I oftentimes go out with the chief, or used to go out with the chief, and we created programs on the campus, RAD programs and things of that nature. That's very, very important to me as well. In terms of, I have been at one institution that had sworn officers, and another institution that also had sworn officer, but we ran up, I was not, campus safety didn't report to me, but I often get asked the question, what is my thoughts between sworn officers versus peace officers? At the end of the day, I think the challenge that we all face is we have to support law enforcement in terms of how do we get to keeping the campus safe. But and what are the interventions that we're making such that things don't escalate? And that's where I spend a lot of my time with the chief. And in instances, I'm a big fan of skip level evaluations, speaking with the officers themselves, just walking across campus. How do you protect the students? Not only the officers, but what are you doing in terms of your blue lights? Do you have enough? Sadly enough, do they function? All of these things, the attention to detail around every aspect of security is key. Lighted pathways, response times, security, surveillance in terms of dark areas. All these things come into play, and I believe it's part of an overarching theme that I subscribe to in terms of keeping our campus safe.
Our next question also has a few branches that come out from the trunk, but they're all wrapped around the same issue having to do with affiliated organizations or direct support organizations. What is your approach with affiliated organizations or direct support organizations within a university? Do you believe in centralized reporting, such as all CFOs reporting up to your department? What about real estate? And do you believe affiliated organizations should hold real estate, or should it be held centrally?
Good question. I don't believe that all the CFOs or the finance reps in each of the colleges need to report directly to me. I don't think so. I think as we get into this budget model and we look at this decentralized operation, you're going to want to have that sense of autonomy, so to speak, because you're in that space. However, what I would say is that we need to create councils so that information is flowing and is flowing freely, that is open and it's transparent, that we do not see one college that is doing something totally different than the rest. We were talking about this morning with the group about the medical center, and I got a better sense of that. When I was at Cornell, it was totally distanced. The main campus was 4 hours away from the medical center. So I'm not necessarily wedded to the idea that they have to report to me, but we have to have some sort of mechanism that information is open, is honest, and is transparent. And that assumptions that are being made as the budget is being built, we can stress test the assumptions. And once we have agreed to what those assumptions and variables are, whenever we do the budget versus actual from the central location, because there has to be a roll-up. And that's part of what we're going to look at, if successful, is how do we set up this system? Workday, I have implemented one module of Workday, but I do know the power of it. But as we're going through that process, I do believe the central organization has to have some window into what each area is doing so that we can keep track and we can get to a place where we have dashboards and things of that nature. So that's number one. In terms of whether or not the affiliated organizations can hold land, there's several things that I would want to explore. There are some things that can be done well in the colleges and the units, and then there are some things that are better done centrally. So for example, I give a good example, debt. We would definitely have to look at an internal bond pool that's handled centrally. We would not want to push the debt back out to the various schools because we have a fiduciary duty to the funding and the agencies through which we garnered that debt. So that's a good example of what I would say would have to remain centrally. Ownership of land, I would hope, would also would have to be university-wide. So under the umbrella of the university, that is something that I think should be in that same category as well. If there are things that are contractually bound or things that you're trying to do in terms of looking at alternative sources of revenue and driving change at the different affiliated organizations, then I think a discussion needs to be had. But at the end of the day, when we report as one institution, consolidated institution. And I think things that are germane to the institution as a whole needs to have some measure of a central oversight in that regard.
Okay. Thank you. Next question deals with ethics and integrity. A strong sense of ethics and integrity are critical to the success of any leader. How do you build a culture of integrity within your team and your organization? Perhaps you can tell us about an experience that tested your ethics and/or integrity in your current role, and if so, what was the outcome of the situation?
Well, integrity means everything to me, and I don't tolerate a lot of things. I'm a very humble person. I don't know if folks know this. People look at me sometime and don't realize I'm a seminarian. I'm a seminary graduate. So from that perspective, just doing right and wrong, the difference between the two, there's a clear line of demarcation. There's no fuzzy math here. There's no graying of the lines. When you start graying the lines, you have problems. When I got into finance, one of my mentors said to me, Gerald, remember this and you'll be fine. Liars figures never lie. When you get to the point that you're going to lie or you're going to lie for someone to cover up something and your utterances become rather mendacious, and then you get to a point where your behavior becomes duplicitous, then I know something is wrong. I will engender that with everyone that's working with me. I will give everybody the benefit of the doubt until they give me a reason that I should not believe you in that instance. The thing that I could say, I literally got to a point at one of my institutions where I found myself at loggerheads with the president. I was hired into my first institution. I was 32 years old. I was the CFO. Came in, we did some great things, stabilized the institution. When I was hired, she gave me a 2-word instruction: fix it. And we went about fixing it, and we did that. We built a 10 million unrestricted reserve in just 4 years. And then she left, she retired. That was a shock for me. I was like, wow, I needed about 6 more years. You could at least get me a decade, but she left and we hired someone else and came in and saw $10 million and saw resources, balance sheet strengthened, but wanted to build a legacy for himself. And in building that legacy, just started to spend and found myself at loggerheads trying to be the chief financial officer and managing the finances in such a way that we can operate and people's lives won't be disrupted. But at the same time, seeing plans being put in place and launched without proper vetting and stress testing ended up with just at the end of the day, I got to a point I couldn't do it. I could not look at some of the things you wanted to do. You talked about the color of money, and you're looking at restricted gifts, and now you want to manage cash flow holistically. We're too small an institution. As a chief financial officer, I can't do that. And my relationship there soured, and I eventually left. A colleague of mine said, Gerald, you're too bright, you're too talented to put up with this. I know you're trying to save the legacy of the president that hired you, but that's not your job. So I basically left at the right time because the relationship was such that it was untenable. My integrity means everything to me. I don't get to the edge of something and then look over and say, what if? If I see I'm getting too close to the edge, I'm going to say something. And if I'm being pushed to do something that is not right, I have been known to leave, and I will do so yet again. My name and my reputation means more to me than any one institution in terms of Gerald being an honest broker. So that's just how I deal with that particular issue of integrity. If I am to catch individuals who are doing things that are nefarious, bending the rules, skirting the rules, we'll have a conversation. And if in that conversation we find that you are definitely out of order in terms of what you're supposed to be doing, then the conversation takes a different turn, and we will probably be having a walk down to HR or something like that.
Right. Okay, thank you for the response. Next question. Assume that you've had a little bit of time to look at UCF, both up close and afar, at least as far as studying us. What is the one thing you would change about UCF if you could?
In terms of, well, I'm going to say it in 2 ways because that's a question that could go a myriad of ways. I think the first thing that I would change is getting everybody to understand. When I say everybody, I mean the entire campus community, the faculty, the staff, the students, the alumni, and all key stakeholders in the city of Orlando and outside. Where exactly does UCF find itself today? I think that's the first thing, because when I look at and take up the financials and just do a quick read of the financials, you go through it, you can clearly see this is a institution that's well renowned, but at the same time, it has these challenges that it has to address around its systems, around its ability to be inside of a state university system that still has to manage, especially in a post-COVID environment. So there were challenges before that. So what I would imagine doing is trying to get everyone to understand where we are. And then from there, we can then bring to bear all the things that you have already started, the new ERP system, the new budget model, the new budget software that you're trying to implement. Those combined will get us a spin effect that is going to be agitating, like that old washing machine used to have the agitator inside of it. That's probably what I see myself doing coming in. It's just not the agitation, meaning that just putting the questions on the table in a very dispassionate way. We've been doing it this way for so long. Here's what the demographics are saying to us. Here's what reality says. Why not try this way? And then be someone working with the provost, in tandem with the provost and the president, to make sure that those discussions are happening and that everyone understands where we are. So when we do have to make the tough decisions, so some tough decisions have to be made at UCF, have to be made based on what I'm seeing. So by the time we get to the tough decisions, there will be a factor of trust or some modicum of trust of what we're trying to do.
Okay, thank you. Next question deals with global climate issues. Please describe any efforts you've led at past institutions to address the global climate crisis.
Okay, so Ithaca College is the best one I can utilize because I was there in that part of the country. Is very, I call it sustainability heaven. We try to address it in various and sundry ways. So part of my facilities team was a set aside and standalone sustainability effort that we had to do, not only by way of simply education, but it's real world things we were doing in terms of, waste. Or better yet, I could do it this way. I felt it so strongly that an opportunity came our way. So I said, how can you kill two birds with one stone? Because we were signatories to the climate action commitment, and we had a carbon neutrality date of 2050, I believe it is, but we had not kickstarted anything. So the students were starting to get a little bit upset, antsy. You signed this commitment, but you haven't really put the resources towards doing it. Well, we didn't have the resources to put to it, but so I had to get creative. And then what we found out is our local utility was going to institute what's called a reverse net metering program. So, you had Cayuga Lake, that's at the bottom of the hill. Cornell and Ithaca are on two opposite hills. And then so we investigated it. And what we ended up doing was putting out our first sustainable program. So we built a solar farm, and the solar farm produced about 10% of our energy. And while at the same time trying to address the budget, saved us about $300,000 a year. So by the time I really got my druthers and get going, I was asked to come and join the team over at Cornell. So that is how I still live by that ethos that sustainability is going to be key. The question now becomes, do we have the will in order to do it? So when we talk about our buildings, things that I used to dream about is, getting panels on the sides of our building, rooftops, the whole 9 yards, rooftop, the natural areas on the campus and things of that nature. How do we get what is our commitment to this? I'm assuming at this point that UCF does in fact have a climate commitment, but I'd like to take a look at that to see what exactly we put in that commitment. And then as we go through the budget challenges here, ask ourselves fundamentally, how could we stay true to the commitment that we have made? Because what has happened with the climate commitment is that people got caught up in it, not realizing that it has a cost, and the cost to it is rather astronomical. But you don't have to go big on everything. You can inch there year after year with incremental investments until you're financially solid to do it in a big way.
Okay. Our next question is going to move us from climate to communications. One of the biggest challenges facing our university is a lack of internal communication. Previous administrations have attempted to improve communication, specifically within the Administration and Finance Division, but these efforts fizzled out as other priorities took precedence. What is your communication philosophy as an administrator, and how do you plan on improving our communication within the unit and across the university, since Administration and Finance touches almost every area of the university?
If fortunate to be here, and obviously I have to have a conversation with Dr. Cartwright if I'm successful, is hopefully bring the dollars and cents program I started at Ithaca College here to UCF. I'm a big proponent of the saying that goes, when people don't know stuff, they make it up. And the only way to get out of that is to communicate. Now, there is a double-edged sword. So for example, I give you a good point, and a group earlier today kind of explained to me what happened. I looked at the campus climate survey, and I was stunned to see the low rate of responses. And I was like, wow, that's very low. So in my head, I'm like, well, it's not a priority for the campus, so the rates are so low, only to find out that individuals are not necessarily reading their emails. Our individuals are not coming up with ways in order to stay engaged. So what I hope to do, did it at Ithaca, did it at Cornell. We created something at Cornell also called DFA Conversations, similar to what we did at Ithaca, but it's in a decentralized environment. We invited every month, because we're so decentralized and I had so many different areas reporting to me, the business services unit, facilities, the treasurer's office. What we would do every month, we have a discipline from my direct reports participate in what's called DFA conversations. So if a hybrid of that is to take place, the question then becomes, is the campus ready for the information and at the same time willing to wrestle with the information? So my philosophy is you have to communicate. You got to do it in person. I manage by walkabout. I get out of my office whenever possible. If I'm selected, that's the first thing I'll do for the first 90 days or so, is going to where people are, having conversations. And as plans start to develop, you have to communicate in person. You got to communicate. I'm a big believer also in intranet and things of that nature. But most of our communications, I'm told, is done through Outlook. And, if the president calls a town hall or something like that, but we need to find ways to saturate the campus with information. Is it going to be a panacea? I don't think so, because people sometimes are overwhelmed. They feel overworked. They don't want to look at another email, but we have to find ways to engage the campus. And more importantly, you get people who are vision carriers to carry the message on your behalf. One of the ways that we've been able to do it is, going back to a previous question, is that if the finance officers in each of the colleges, they are coming to these monthly meetings that is called by this position, there would be no ambiguity as to what's being discussed. And we do it two ways. We do it for the finance officers in the colleges from the academic side, and we do it for the finance officers that are in the non-academic side. So we do them in successive days so the messaging stays consistent. And the expectation would be that they will assist the administration in carrying forward the message back to their colleges and down into their organizations.
Thank you. We have time for just one or two more questions, and then I'll ask you for a quick summary of your thoughts if you'd like. But the next question is, can you tell us about a situation where you've had to transform the culture of the organization, and how did you approach this challenge, and what was the overall outcome?
Well, yes, the biggest challenge I could say in changing a culture, you can never change a culture by yourself. I think that is a misnomer. No one person can change a culture. So if I look at what I lived through in the fall of 2015 on Ithaca College's campus when race relations blew up, and I'm sitting there as someone born in Jamaica, born and raised, always been surrounded by strong people of color leading and doing great things. I came to this country and I went to Howard University, which is the mecca for Black thought and Black excellence. And then I went to Johnson C. Smith and so on. No, I go to Ithaca and I realized that individuals really don't have an appreciation for the lived experiences of people of color. So we give lip service in many ways to diversity issues. We talk about it and we create these platforms and you go to these things and then we try to tie it to performance evaluations. The one thing that I have learned is that you cannot legislate morality. You have to get to a point where you're going to engage in the tough and hard conversation. So what did we do? I had a division of over 300 or so people. I didn't mandate it. I just said every Wednesday at lunchtime, we're going to get together and we're going to talk about this issue of race, diversity, and inclusion. Everyone thought it was crazy. We went and got Dr. Beverly Tatum's book, Why Are All the Black Children Sitting Together Alone in the Cafeteria, and Other Difficult Conversations. And we had regular people just take a chapter. We didn't bring in experts from the faculty or anything. We wanted people to be in the moment to talk about this versus simply going to a seminar and checking a box. What we learned and discovered from that is a couple of my Caucasian brothers and sisters, as I so to speak, they got a real understanding of what people of color go through. It was interesting because one of our leaders in the division, an African-American gentleman, he was married to a white lady. And he shared all the things he went through, even with his father-in-law. And then as that started to move, people started to see, oh, this is a real thing. It is a real thing because you then grew the campus community of students from 5% to 25% over a period of 7 years. But the people who are giving the instruction, the people who are doing the administrative tasks, they have never experienced anything that that population that's coming to campus has lived through. So we did that. It was very tough. As we went through that process, some of my colleagues basically realized that they have to look at some of their family members in a way with the off-colored jokes and things of that nature. And it was tough for them. Tears were shed. And people would come back and say, even to this day, people will say to me, Mr. Hector, when you did that, that was a really transformative time for me. The gentleman who was an African-American and married to a Caucasian lady, he is now implementing that same methodology at the University of Richmond in Richmond, Virginia. So when I think about culture shifting or doing anything with the culture, you have to have the tough conversations. You can't leave it to chance. Because at the end of the day, in a community that's an academic community, we are supposed to be the experts in it. And if we do not have the courage to push the envelope on that particular issue, I fear that we will end up going through fits and starts. And every 5 years or so, we're going to be wondering what happened. And I hope that if I'm successful, I hope to join in that conversation as well.
Right. Well, we have reached the closing moments of our conversation here this afternoon, Gerald, but very quickly, is there a closing thought that you want to share with our audience?
I would just say to everyone that's watching, higher education is in a new place. It's a new place, but it's not a place that we never saw. Many of us have seen this coming now for years. In 2014, I wrote a white paper that's still being reviewed to this day, and people are picking it up and calling me again. It was called Navigating the New Normal, MSI's Effectiveness and Avoiding Financial Exigency. I think why it's coming up again is because now COVID has put a new spin on this whole thing. Things that we were not able to do 5 years ago because there were resistance to it. You're now having to do it within a matter of weeks and in a matter of months. So I use this expression, we have to get from the Flintstones to the Jetsons real fast. And in order to do that, you can only do that by having the tough conversations. And the conversations don't always have to revolve around money and operations. It has to revolve more around culturally, what are we willing to change? What are we willing to engage a real robust discussion on based on the data at our disposal? And I would just challenge you, if I'm successful or not, to not get off this train of trying to get the right systems in place, trying to get the cultural aspects around the past in place, and strive for the aspirational goals that you have set. Wonderful institution, has accomplished quite a bit, doing great things in Central Florida and across the United States. And if so fortunate to be the person that's selected, I'd be more than happy to join in that conversation and that transformation.
Great. Thank you, Gerald. And to close us out this afternoon for this open forum session, I want to first thank all the members of the UCF family, our students, our faculty, and our staff for joining us in today's session. I want to remind them that there is a survey available at ucf.edu/leadership. That's ucf.edu/leadership, which is found on the Administration and Finance search page. And then finally, to you, Gerald, a very special nod of appreciation for sharing your time, your insights, and your experiences as a senior administrative and finance professional. We greatly appreciate the time you gave us this afternoon. Wish you all the best. Stay safe and stay well.
Thank you, sir. Greatly appreciate it.
Bye-bye all.